Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. For this week's episode, we're doing something a little different. Every month with my Cork Crew Tasting Club, I host a virtual community event. Sometimes these events are workshops hosted by myself or other talented people, but many times they're in the form of a Q&A with someone else in the wine world. Back in September, I had the opportunity to invite Andrew Sides. He's the co-founder and winemaker at Lost Straw Cellars in Texas to come chat with the crew. And yes, you heard correctly, Texas wine. We had such a great conversation that I wanted to share this chat with you. So consider this your exclusive sneak peek into the Cork Crew Club. I'd tell you more about Andrew, but I think he does such a great introduction in the chat that I'm just going to let him do it himself. And of course, if you want to be a part of these conversations live and have the opportunity to ask these people your questions, all you have to do is join the Cork Crew. It's $26 a month or less if you pay annually, and you get access to community events just like this one and virtual tasting parties where we taste and explore 2 new wines every month. All right, let's get into it. Thanks for joining us, Andrew, and for setting this up, Leah. I really appreciate it. As soon as I had thought about connecting, or we'd been wanting to explore more outside of the general area where a lot of winemakers, that at least winemakers I know, with Washington, California. And then when I thought of Texas, I thought of Lost Straw. I've had your wines a couple times before and really enjoyed them. So I was really excited when you guys were willing to come on and talk with us. So do you just want to do a little intro, who you are, what you do, and what Lost Straw is?
Well, yeah, first of all, it's super flattering that when you thought of Texas wine, you thought of Lost Straw. That means a lot. I am Andrew Sides, the founder of Lost Straw Cellars, and we have been producing wine this is our 11th vintage, so pretty fun. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but we have when I look back and think about where we started and kind of the evolution of our brand and even our wines and just the growth that's happened in the industry and with our company, we've kind of grown together in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways that's really cool. In a lot of ways that's been very challenging, but it's all been pretty exciting to be a part of the wave and the culture that is Texas wine. As far as me, I started out as the single employee of Lost Straw, and I come from a farming background. So that side of the business and the brand has always been very important for me. And that's the story that I really do love to tell in reference to Lost Straw and kind of our why, why we're here. And I truly do believe that Texas can produce the highest quality wines and as high of quality wines as anywhere else in the world. We just do it in a different place, and telling the story of those places within Texas is truly what makes wine so beautiful and romantic. And it's what makes it so fun and exciting to share year in and year out. And I think it's what has driven me to continue the passion of telling the story of Texas and how our wines and our agricultural practices, our sustainability practices, now that we're really pushing to the forefront of our brand and a lot of our culture in the vineyard, is it's a fun story to tell. And so been a fun and amazing and gritty and challenging ride, but one that has definitely been worthwhile.
I definitely want to ask a lot about Texas wine growing, because I think that's what's so special about this and fun. But I also want to just learn a little bit more about you. So you mentioned that you have a farming background. How did you get into wine?
So I got into wine because I'm a 3rd generation farm kid from the high plains where cotton and peanuts were the predominant agricultural crop. And my uncle started growing grapes which when I found out that it was going to be grapes that were like fermented to make booze, I was like, oh, I want to do some of that. That sounds way better than like farming cotton. So honestly, it wasn't, I did not get into the industry by just some like grandiose passion of like wine and like discovery of it, but truly because it was something that was unique to our site, unique to our area in the High Plains. And then once, like when I felt like our area that we were growing grapes was starting to gain some notoriety around the state for like quality and a differentiating like factor for our fruit quality, it became really, really cool because I was like, literally had spent 18 years trying to do everything I could to get out of the area that I grew up in. And then I was like, all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, this area has like something cool and unique to offer. Like we can grow grapes like on a really high quality scale that people are like wanting and desiring to have in their cellars. So it made me like passionate about the agricultural piece of wine, and also it made me very, very just interested and curious about like what the industry could be. And once I felt like I was like getting in on it, like at the ground floor, like at the very like small, like, wow, this really could be something. And it was just kind of this like fun, mysterious thing. I totally graduated and went and had like what I call my big boy career first, which was like all of 5 years as a civil engineer. And then just couldn't shake the itch to get back into the farming and grape growing side of like my family's business, and kind of partnered with my uncle and decided to start making some wines on a recreational level in hopes that we could produce something that would be meaningful for a brand eventually. And then once I realized that like making wine, while it does have so many different nuances and interesting pieces about it that make it unique to every single site and every single like technique, truly like wine making is the process of taking the quality fruit and just like not messing it up and making sure that you ferment it in a way that is meaningful and showcases the site specifically. And that was always kind of my goal in the project. Like when we started making wine, is like I didn't want to try to make wine like they were making it in other places. That wasn't as interesting to me as just like I really did want to tell the story of the sites that we were growing grapes and varietal selection that we kind of evolved into over a course of about 15 years, and why those varieties tell the best stories of those sites, and why our wine that is a Cabernet or is a Sangiovese may not taste like any Sangiovese or Cabernet that you've ever had before, and why that's okay. And really letting people like discover wine in an open and honest way. When you make wine in Texas, and you pretty much, when people come into your tasting room, I feel like you already have like, you're already fighting a battle. Like they're coming in with like some stigma about Texas wine that they've had before. And I always kind of like to like embrace that and not be combative anyway, but just like really try to like learn about people's like taste and what they were like, where they came in with this preconceived notion of what they thought Texas wine was, and really just try to change their mind, and not try to change their mind, but maybe enlighten them in some way that they would be interested to like try it, and not just wine that we produce, but from somewhere else that's unique in the hill country or in the High Plains, and really start to like think about what we're doing and think about the reasons like that wine is different from our region. So it's been I feel like I said a lot there, but
Loved hearing it all. It was a good intro to you, and I like highlighting. I think every good winemaker I've talked to is in that field, or in that box of saying like, yeah, like winemaking is, there are challenges to it, but like what's the biggest part of it is getting good grapes or having good grapes, and you have to do that part right in order to have good wine. The winemaking can't fix bad grapes necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that's why like for Texas, like farming is such an important aspect of winemaking, because we are a continental climate. Like Texas is not like a coastal climate where your weather is the same every single year. Like the West Coast, like, man, it must be really nice to like farm grapes on the West Coast where the weather is the same every single year. We don't have to deal with like wildfires, so there is that. But I will say like every vintage since we have started, our initial vintage in 2012, there has not been a single vintage that I feel like you could point back to directly from bud break to harvest and say like, oh, things went like exactly like it did in 2016, or oh, things went exactly like they did in 2019. There's always just like differences in the weather. We talk about microclimates a lot in the wine industry, and especially like globally. You go to Europe and a lot of the places where they talk about their small microclimates in different areas. And while they do exist, and I feel like microclimates definitely give us the ability to predict outcomes of weather. You can't ever predict the weather, but you can predict outcomes of weather. Like you can say like, well, because it did this, I know that I need to like do this with the fruit. And you can do that a little easier with tribal knowledge of using from different sites that we work with like year in and year out. But the weather in Texas is like never the same. Like we've had years where like through the growing season, it hasn't gone above 90 degrees. And then like years like this year was like, I don't think it was below 90 degrees for about 60 days in the high plains. And so it's just wild, but it's pretty fascinating. But I think it is something that is unique to Texas that we truly like. Some other places like, you know, France and like Southern Rhone and a lot of those places, they experience a lot of the same challenges we do. They're not coastal. They're not a coastal climate either. And they celebrate vintages. Like they celebrate vintage variation very, very much. And that is something that I think domestically, like I think we have been a little bit just guarded from that. Like most of our, you know, predominant wineries and wine producers are like they're coastal climates along the West Coast, and they're great producers. And I don't want to take anything away from them, but I do feel like they have been almost subjected to making wine taste so similar year in and year out that it's almost like kind of taken away from like the really cool, unique aspects of vintage variation, which I feel like in Texas we embrace a lot. We talk about some of our best vintages like 2017 and 19 and really covet those vintages. And it's a great story to tell on like why those vintages are important and why you should seek after some of those wines, because there have been some vintages, you know, in the last 5 to 6 years that where things just absolutely grew perfect, and we didn't get rain through September, and the harvest stayed really cool, and our nights were really, you know, very low humidity, and like things like that just really affect the quality of the fruit as it comes in. And what it does is it gives you like a kind of global, like industry wide quality thing to point to. So you know that like you can go to 40 different wineries in Texas, and you know that like their 17 stuff better be good. Otherwise, like they probably shouldn't be making wine. And like transversely, you can go like, man, if their 2020 stuff is good, then they're really quality producers, because 2020 was a pretty rough vintage for a lot of wineries. So I don't know. I love vintage variation. I love the differences. I love to be able to taste verticals from the same vineyard, same site, same variety, and like talk about why they're different and celebrate why they're different. So
I'm in the Finger Lakes of New York, so I definitely hear
yeah,
you on the vintages.
yeah, you know how that feels.
But 2020 was great for us.
Yeah, 20 was great. Pretty much everywhere except one area of Texas in the high plains, and it was pretty rough. But the hill country was great that year. It's also why like growing grapes in Texas is so unique, is our AVAs are spread so far apart, and they're like could not be any more different. Like the soils are different, the climates are different, the grapes we grow in the regions are different. The varietal selection, the harvest, bud break. We started picking grapes in the hill country, for instance, in early July, and we were done 6 weeks ago. We're like halfway done in the high plains. So it's just a very, very different, it's almost like two harvests in the same state.
Does the bud break happen earlier and like fruit set and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a shorter growing season in the hill country for sure. I think a lot of that has to do with like just heat, and we water pretty hard through the heat to keep the vines stable, like keep them from collapsing. And it definitely leads to a little bit shorter growing season, but it is nice because it never catches rain. So like that's like definitely not the rainy season. Whereas like the high plains, it's nice that we get these cool nights and we're really starting to like cool off in the high plains, and we're getting some like slow ripening, which is usually really good because we can retain acidity, some other components that are good for the fruit itself. But also the longer we get into the season, like it loves to rain in the high plains from like middle of September to middle of October. So that is a challenge that you just feel like you're constantly dodging the rainy weather up there. And it still hails this time of year in the high plains, which is pretty fascinating, but it does. Like we dodged a hailstorm 2 nights ago at one of the vineyards that we were about to pick at. So pretty wild.
All right, so I want to get into a little bit. I want to talk about the wines we're tasting as well. So I want to get to those, but first, I kind of just want to go a little bit more into the grapes. And because it's so interesting, because to me, when I think about an area where like you want to grow grapes, I would think, yeah, like Texas's climate would be too hot. And then, like you said, unpredictable with like the hail or the rain. So what is it that makes Texas great for growing grapes?
I think what I'll say is like I'll take your question and like there are great things about growing grapes in Texas. And like I was alluding to earlier, there are great things about growing grapes in those different regions. And there are also challenges in those two different regions. For instance, the heat is a thing, like the heat plus the humidity. If we just had the heat, we would be fine. But the humidity starts to introduce a lot of disease pressure, fungal pressure that you'll get during fruit set, ripening, all that time frame when it's like very, negative for the fruit itself. And that usually occurs more in the hill country than it does the high plains. A lot of people don't realize that the high plains, which is the panhandle region of Texas, are you familiar with like the Lubbock area?
Yeah.
I have this cool map here actually.
Oh,
so
nice.
like this is the high plains, like up here, this region that we talk about.
Okay.
So this is the hill country down here, like
west. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Really big difference.
About 300 miles apart. So different soil types, definitely different weather, but a lot of people don't realize the high plains is about 3,500. It averages about 3,500 feet above sea level. So it is definitely like high elevation farming gives us a great diurnal shift. Days that it is 105 degrees in the hottest part of the day, in the mornings, it can cool down to low 60s. So it's a very, very like vast difference in temperature, very, very low humidity, a lot of wind. So a lot of regions around like coastal regions will really talk about like sea breeze and all of that like ocean air that's constantly flowing through the vineyard. Like we get that naturally just in the form of dust storms in the high plains.
Sure.
And while the dust is like not always great for like driving and just like quality of life in general, I will say the wind is actually pretty good, and it's vital for those vineyards, especially once we get really vigorous canopies. We really try to grow our canopies pretty big in the high plains just because we want to like really get a lot of leaf growth early on. And that helps us like make it all the way through ripening. Like, so we get a lot of that photosynthesis going on, a lot of energy pushing to the fruit, like through ripening. But what that also does, like in the hill country, is it creates like a big moisture cap. Like, so like you get, if you have any humidity, like all that moisture stays in the vine. That's when you get a lot of disease pressure. Well, in the high plains, it just blows, like the wind's blowing like constantly. And it just like keeps, it's like an air dryer that just keeps all that fruit really nice and dry, keeps the canopy really nice and dry. So we don't have any like insect colonization there. There's very, very little, like we don't have to spray incest, like in any kind of like insect repellent, anything like that in the high plains. So that's like definitely an attribute where the wind's not always the most pleasant to deal with for like just a normal day. If you like your hair to look a certain way,
right?
like it in the high plains, but
grapes like it.
Yeah, the grapes do pretty well there.
Nice. Okay. Well, so talking about the high plains, let's talk the first wine. So this white wine that you recommended was the Peak Pool, which I really haven't seen in a lot of places. I know there's probably maybe one Washington producer, one or two that I've seen that are doing it now, but otherwise I've seen it in France, but that's about it. So I'm kind of curious, like, how did you choose this grape?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we first started producing fruit, one of the first white varieties that we planted was Viognier, and we planted it for a lot of reasons. One, it was a little bit more like notable from like just domestically. People have heard of Viognier before. And it was one of the better white varieties. Like Chardonnay never seemed to ripen. Pinot Grigio, we could never hang a like crop set on, could never get it ripe. Like all of the really like notable varieties that are grown domestically just did not seem to be working in the high plains. And so Viognier actually started pretty strong and was one of the first ones that was working. We're like, well, maybe, our climate is pretty similar to to France and southern France. Maybe we should just do a lot of Rhone varieties. So then we started planting Marsanne and Roussanne, and Roussanne is actually like one of the largest, most widely planted white varieties in the High Plains now. But we also like just through, Grenache Blanc, some of them just randomly don't work very well. Like Grenache Blanc has never grown very well for us. But my uncle was like, hey, I had this wine and it was really amazing. It's like a high acid producer. And that's one of the challenges that we always have is like retaining acidity through our like hot climate. So like our acid, like fruit starts to get really ripe, our acid starts to really fall out pretty fast. And he's like, I've heard it's like a very like acidic, like acid monster. Like we should try this grape. And so we did, we planted it and we got like a really big crop off of it, like second leaf, which was pretty unheard of. Usually it's like third leaf. And so we cut a bunch of the fruit off and had no intention of actually like, we were just cutting it off for like, just to sustain the plant itself. But then we made like a kind of a fun little Verjus project out of it. Anyway, that's long story long. The next year, like we hung like a really nice, like well-balanced, like 4 ton of the acre crop. And we started noticing like as it started getting riper, it's like, man, it's like 19 bricks and it's still like 3.1 pH. Like that was like unheard of for us. Like usually like fruit will start to, as soon as it starts to hit that like 19, 20 mark, it's like, man, I hope it hangs on at 3.5, or hope we can get it in 3.6. And we got all the way to like 21 and a half bricks and it was still like 3.3. And we're like, man, we should just pick this. And if anything, if it doesn't taste good, we'll just use it like as like an acid based blender. And we produced the wine. It was really amazing. It won like a ton of awards that year. And we entered it in a bunch of stuff and had a bunch of press about it because it was a very unique wine. And we were the first pig pool producer in Texas and all this stuff. And then we just kind of became known for it. And we've made one ever since. And we've done them very differently. And there's definitely a method that we like to stick to for our favorite one. But it keeps a very rich kind of like great like fruit, stone fruit notes, but also like just has very, very balanced acid, very natural acid that I feel like really carries that wine and makes it really delightful through the heat of summer. And I think that may be one of the reasons it's so popular in our tasting room and in our courtyard and at our property is because it's just like so dang good when it's hot outside. And if you like serve it chilled and it's like very food friendly. I'm a big fan of oysters and seafood in general. And so I just like personally like the wine and feel like I talk it up for that reason. But it's just been a strong producer for us. And I feel pretty proud of that wine from its inception because I do feel like there are a lot of people in Texas now producing pig pool. And I have like no desire to like toot our own horn, but it's like those are the kind of things that are good for the industry. It's like we found something that worked, other producers planted it. Now there's probably 80 acres of pig pool, which I think might be more than California, which is kind of fun to me. It's like we have more acres of a variety than like, the largest grape producer in the United States.
I love it. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It honestly reminds me a little bit of a Muscadet in the sense that it's like got that high acidity, but it also has like you said, it's got like not quite a creaminess, but that texture to it that gives it a little something more as well, which I think is unique compared to like the one I've had from France.
Yeah, you're probably drinking the 22, which I will say we did experiment with getting it about a brick and a half riper than we normally do. And will say I prefer the 21 and that was a little leaner, a little bit more acid driven, but the 22 is good in its own respect too.
Yeah, this would be one that like, I think I would prefer to drink this one like more so on its own. I think it would go well with food too, but as you're describing the 21 would be like my seafood pairing or, right. If it's got more of that crisp acidity to it. Whereas this one's like, it has enough fruit to it that I'm just like, oh, this is nice.
Yeah, we took that wine actually out to Paso. We're a member of the Rhone Rangers, which is fun. We're the only Texas winery that goes out there. And I feel like we're kind of like a really intriguing thing for everyone. They're like, okay, I got to go try the Texas wine. And it's the same response we always get like in the tasting room. And they're like, oh, wow, this is actually really good. And I'm like, Yeah, that's the response we love. This is actually good. But yeah, they're always seem to be blown away. And they were like, we had a lot of compliments about the peak pool, and that's obviously a wine that was showcased a lot at that event. So it was fun to kind of taste it alongside a lot of those wines that are grown either Central Coast or Paso region.
Right. That would be fun to throw it in like a blind tasting with some of those and see if people could pick it out. I feel like it would blend right in terms of like it's got the great balance of everything. So I'm curious too. I wanted to ask earlier, and I'm going to go back to it. What are some like common misconceptions that people have about Texas wine, or like myths that people kind of come in, like you said, come into the tasting room with?
I would say one is that they're going to be like very flawed or be sweet. There were a lot of producers very early on in Texas that were producing like off dry or sweet wine. And that was because they were all selling it on the bottom shelf at the grocery store, because until like 2003, you couldn't sell wine out of a tasting room in Texas. Like, it was against the law. So it was all had to go through a wholesaler. And so like once that, like prohibition rules, like it's kind of crazy, like how long it took to get a lot of the laws like that passed. But once we got to a place where you could actually make wine with intention and sell it in a tasting room and like tell a story of like your vineyard, your site, then you started getting some like real, like some good producers, like both in the vineyard and in the winery. But prior to that, there was like a generation of like winemakers for a long time that just made it sweet and charged $7.99 on the shelf of your local grocery store, and that was that was Texas wine. Like, and that existed for like 10 years before this like new like wine growing and winemaking and the true like industry as it is today existed. So a lot of people can only think about that. And I will say, back, even 10 years ago, when we were first starting out, you could go to 10 wineries and you might find like two of them or three out of 10 wineries where you liked at least half of the wines on their tasting list. Whereas like now, I feel like if you went to 10 wineries in Texas, like there would probably be only like three that you were like, yeah, really, their wines weren't very good. And so like that's just kind of like the evolution of where we've gone as an industry. And we've attracted a lot of talent, I will say, that has helped us like propel us to making some really good wines, and not just in the winemaking department. Like, we've attracted a lot of good marketing talent, like a lot of good business talent, venture capital people that are coming in with real dollars to spend, and like make it like this industry is actually becoming like a profitable ventures for some companies. So it's exciting to see. I like being a part of it and telling the story and just riding the wave.
I love it. I saw Rachel, you unmuted. Did you have a question or anything?
No, I just wanted to comment. It sounds a lot like what the Finger Lakes, went through in the past. Lots of hybrids and native varietals and sweeter wines and stuff. I moved to this area in 1999, and I've been tasting wines in this area ever since. And just the evolution that I've seen in this area since then has been kind of astounding. So it's just interesting to hear it kind of mirrored in what you're experiencing. I know we recently lost a Finger Lakes winemaker to Texas, actually. So it's
happening. Like,
yeah.
It's just kind of fun. Like, we have people all the time that are, they'll ask us like, man, are you worried about like too many wineries are coming in? I'm like, man, the more good wineries we get here, it's like Disney World. Like, if there was only one really cool ride or two really cool rides at Disney World, like, you wouldn't go there, and you wouldn't go there like multiple times. But because there's like so much to do and there's like so many different places to visit, like you have to go back multiple times to like get through it all. So that's the goal.
Do you ever find yourself standing in front of the wine aisle at the grocery store, feeling completely lost and overwhelmed? Don't worry, you're not alone. But what if I told you that I have a way to transform the wine aisle from overwhelming into an endless sea of joy and discovery? And it involves drinking wine and joining the most welcoming and fun community. In my Cork Crew virtual tasting club, we're all about exploring new and exciting wines in a fun and supportive community. No more feeling intimidated or stuck in a rut of buying the same bottle of wine. Each month, we explore 2 new wines, so you can broaden your palate and explore new flavors. Not only will we taste these wines together, but we'll learn about where the wines come from, essentially traveling the world all through the wine in our glass. Come join the Cork Crew, and you'll have the opportunity to taste new wines, meet winemakers and other wine professionals, and connect with like-minded wine lovers from all over the world. Imagine the joy of discovering a new favorite wine and being able to confidently choose a bottle that you know you'll love. So, why not join us? Head to my website at corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew to sign up. And don't forget to use code WINE101 to get your first month free. And now, back to the show. Okay, so now I want to ask, because you guys grow a lot of different grapes, and I know Texas with it, still trying to find itself. And I'm curious because when I think of certain regions, you think of what grape. Like for me, like Washington is like Riesling. I think they do really great Syrah. And then, you think of different areas of California and what they make, Santa Barbara's Pinot Noir. So what do you see like a grape, like a top grape showing up for Texas, or will it still kind of be this like grab bag for a while of like all these different styles?
Yeah, if I had like seriously $5 for every time someone's asked me that question, I wouldn't be on this podcast because I'd probably be like vacation in some cool place. But I don't know that there's like a singular or group of varieties that will ever carry the torch for Texas wine. I do feel like there are some that are going to help us from the sustainability standpoint and like consistency standpoint. I think one of the curses of our weather in Texas is, we have personally grown and produced over 40 different varieties of wine. And there are some years that some of them really hit. Like there's like Nebbiolo, like a few every year, every now and then is like really good. Zinfandel can be really good every now and then. We've even done we have Sauvignon Blanc that we're getting out of a really unique place at Del Valle that like every 2 or 3 years, it's like really, really good and fascinating. But for me, for us to be a region that is truly on the level of New York, Washington, California, Oregon, those places, they do it year in and year out. And it's every single year there's quality wine that is produced. And so we are really trying to like gear and go toward those varieties that we've seen as varieties that have been constant producers for us. And while I love the fact that we have made a really, really like amazing, remarkable Zinfandel in the past, we can't do it every year. And so like to try to do it every year, I feel like takes away from like these like 4 or 5 core varieties that every single year they've been really good for us. And while they may be different because of vintage variation, like we talked about earlier, they are still very high quality. And they're ones that year in and year out, if you came this year and then you came back a year or 2 from now, and you're like, the one wine that I remember being really awesome was Sangiovese. And in 2 years, I can guarantee you that we're going to have a really, really good Sangiovese. Whereas if you came and you tried a Nebbiolo, which there's not very much of it planted, it's good every now and then. But if you came and that was like the wine that you like attached to, and you're like, man, that was a really good Nebbiolo, that blew my mind. Then you came back in a year and we're like, oh yeah, we didn't have Nebbiolo this year. It wasn't very good. It didn't make it in the vineyard, fruit set was terrible. Then you're like, oh, well, okay, I guess I'll try something else. But and you wouldn't be as excited about your experience. So we're really trying to get to a point where it's like not the conversation of the variety specifically, but it's the style of wine that we're making, the sites that we love producing fruit from. And I will say like blending is a key component to a lot of wines in Texas. And I think that like other regions in the world that have kind of unique, blends that have really created an identity for a region, I feel like that could exist inside of Texas in some places as well. Like we're doing some really cool stuff with like Mourvedre and Cab blended together, and even like Tempranillo and Cab blended together. And so there's some really cool stuff. And that is how you create consistency, because you can really use those varieties every single year. You may do 67% this year and 54% next year, but you can build this wine to really showcase that site that year and keep it as high as quality as possible.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's interesting because like my brain wants to like associate a region with a grape, because I think that's that's what Europe has done, right? That's what like all of, France and Italy, and they have these certain regions that are known for this grape. But there's also like you said, it can kind of put you in a box, and it's better that like you can, kind of lean on like this area of the of the US, or this area of Texas, you can expect this style of wine no matter what kind of the grape variety is, and learning that more.
100%.
All right, well, let's talk about the Sangiovese then. So I have the 2020 Texas Hill Country Sangiovese, and I know
He was really good in the Hill Country.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a good vintage in the Hill Country.
So Sangiovese is typically like, that's the Italian grape, like the Chianti that people are familiar with. Was this kind of one of the early ones that you grew in Texas, or did this kind of come later?
It was one of the earlier ones. Definitely when Lost Straw, like our very first vintage, which was 2012, we produced two different wines, a Tempranillo and a Sangiovese.
Oh.
And Sangiovese has been around in Texas for a while. And what I love about Sangiovese is it is really easy to grow. So from a vineyard sustainability standpoint, really, really good. Like you don't have to like do a whole lot of like farming input to produce a like high quality product. Like that's the goal, right? With farming, you're like trying to create efficiencies and still have the highest quality product in the end. And then every year in the cellar, it just continues to amaze me. It is a little bit lighter bodied than I think most traditional, like a Chianti or a Sangiovese that's grown on the West Coast, potentially, that was a little higher alcohol or got picked a little bit later, maybe a little bit more tannin. But I find it just really, really beautiful at 13% alcohol, medium bodied. It hits a lot of those like really lifted, like fruit forward notes, and then it retains acidity very, very well, which helps that balance for a lot of food friendly wines. I feel like Sangiovese is really, really perfect for Texas cuisine because we use a lot of oak fire, a lot of smoke, and a lot of the things we do. And I feel like Sangiovese has been something that's always paired very well with those kind of dishes. And it's just been a favorite of mine from the very beginning. And we've been producing wine since 2012. There hasn't been a single vintage that we didn't have a Sangiovese on the menu. So that tells you something.
All right. Okay. Rachel, did you find out which one do you have?
So I have the High Plains 2020
okay.
Texas High Plains Sangiovese. So
I would add that one because I think we're like getting lower on that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
Well, I'm glad I got it then. So how would you how would you compare this one to the which one do you have, Haley? The
Hill Country.
So you're going to get a lot more like minerality and like gaminess, in my opinion, from the High Plains. A lot more of that desert sage impacts the profile of the aromatics and kind of through that mid palate. The wines are generally a little bit more lean, mineral driven in the High Plains. The limestone bedrock is super, super shallow, but below like the soil in the High Plains, especially along the draw, as opposed to like the Hill Country where there's a lot more of like a granite but it's deeper. Like the soil is a little bit more clay, holds water a little longer. So your root bed does not like reach and extend all the way into the rock always like it does in the High Plains, where in the High Plains, the roots grow in the rocks. So to me, you get a lot more of that minerality in the fruit. It still has a lot of upfront, like, pretty ripe fruit notes, but I find it a little bit more on that kind of like tobacco note or that sage characteristic that you'll get.
I'm glad I ended up with this one because that's more my kind of wine. And it's interesting because on the nose, the fruits are really ripe and almost tending towards like almost raisiny, like dried fruits or cooked fruits or something like that. But on the palate, it doesn't come off as really ripe fruit at all. So I like that because I'm not a big fan of like really ripe
Attractive, yeah.
very ripe, overripe, or kind of stewed dried fruits.
All right. Okay, so that's fun. I really love the Sangiovese. I think this is one that I've had from you before, and I think I've had the Roussan before, which I have another bottle downstairs that I am excited to try. But I think you're right. It's such like and it's also like a food friendly wine. It does do the same thing that like you think of Italian wine would, like you said, like it pairs well, has that acidity that balances out, and it's not overwhelming. I think one thing I thought I would see from Texas wine would be high alcohol because of the heat, but it sounds like you guys have done a lot in the vineyards and really kind of learned as you went to be able to balance that out.
Yeah, what I would say is we've like very much learned that for us, that medium bodied, fresher approach has been what our fans and customers are kind of associate our brand with, but also it's like kind of the style of wines that I like to make and drink, which I feel like that plays a pretty big part in like the decision making there. But we also don't want to ripen them too much because of that acidity factor. Like generally, like we're really paying attention to like our TA and pH as we approach, which is basically the two acid measurables in the fruit as we approach harvest. And we're pretty low impact winery. Like we don't want to add acid or we don't want to add sugar. So we really try to just like balance and make that call between like natural acid, natural sugar. And like some years we're going to have a little lower alcohol than others. And some it's going to be a little higher. It just depends on where the fruit is when we make that decision to go ahead and pick it.
Okay, so I have two last questions, and I feel like this first one might be an impossible question. Sometimes I give it to winemakers and they look at me like, no, I'm not going to. Do you have a favorite wine that you make?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. That's like asking me which one of my kids is my favorite.
I know. I'm always just curious if there's like one that you're just like, maybe it doesn't even have to be like favorite, but just like you get really excited to make it, or you're just like most looking for, which maybe it's the same thing.
This question like I would if you asked me if I had a favorite kid. And yes, I do. Absolutely. But it changes.
Tell me, what are you?
It changes all the time. So I have 3 boys and love them all to death. I definitely have a favorite every single day, but it's not the same one. So
that's fair. That's fair. All right. I'll take it.
I was so proud of the GSM that we do. It's a really, really good wine. You can find that one on the website too. We just released the new vintage and it's really, really good. The Peak Pool is always, it's a crowd favorite, fan favorite. If you're into rosé, we make a Counoise rosé that we've done for 5 vintages now that will absolutely like get you in a bad place if you're just all of a sudden look up and you're like, wow, that was a whole bottle of wine. But it's really good. I've definitely had a lot of Counoise rosé through these hot summer months this year. Our Tempranillos are always really good, especially the Hill Country Tempranillo this year actually has a little bit of Tannat blended with it. So if you're looking for a little bit bigger, more dense, like a wine that's got a little bit more density, a little bit more tannin, that Tempranillo from the Hill Country 2020 is really, really good. But yeah, for like Thanksgiving, I'm going to have GSM like for every day with every meal, every starch, all the things. It's definitely one of my favorites.
I can believe that with how great this the single varietal Mourvèdre is. Really nice. It was exactly what I mean. I've had a couple recently. I think I had one from California and one from Washington. And I've been really into it. And this one like definitely hits the mark. It's slightly different, right? But it's so balanced and the fruit is really deep in it. I really like that.
Which one is that you have?
I have the 2019 Mourvèdre from Texas Hill Country. It's the
yeah. Variation Hills. That's Variation Hills.
Yeah.
There's golden in their hills. Another one that is like a really good is this Petite Syrah.
Oh, okay.
21 Petite Syrah, really good. The 2020 Syrah that actually might be the best wine that we've ever made. 2020 Syrah, that is one. That's a notable one. I should have said that one first.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
That 2020 Syrah, it might be sold out. So I hate if I would lead you down a dark road there. But if it is on there, you should snatch up a bottle when you get that GSM for your Thanksgiving meal. You'll impress the people.
Okay, I love it. All right, so the last question, I always like to ask about something that like is coming in the future. So either like, is there anything like new that you're currently working on or something that you would like to make that you haven't had a chance yet to?
Yeah, a super amazing property is what we're working on right now. If you did not know, we are like headed out to Johnson City. Like we are finally getting to like expand and grow. We have a vineyard that we've been cultivating out there for about 3.5 years, and it's 8 acres of an estate vineyard. We built the tasting room on it at the beginning of last year and are moving our production out there for this 2024 harvest. And the production facility and like new tasting space is almost done. So I'm really excited about that. Definitely something to come see out in Johnson City when you plan your next trip.
Yes, yes. Don't worry, we've got somebody in the Cork Crew here that's a Texas native, and she's been trying to get us out to Texas here.
Yeah, you definitely need to come check it out. It's a little slice of beauty for sure.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I love the wine world. This is people who love talking about wine and love sharing. It's just such a great vibe. And it was really, really nice talking with you, especially. I think it made sense for how lovely the wines are. And just even when I connected with Leah over the emails too, you guys are just so friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, thanks for supporting what we do. You know, Texas agriculture is near and dear to my heart. So anytime we can showcase that, I'm happy. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel. Good to see you.
All right.
Thank you. I'm having trouble with that mute again. Good to see you too. It's really fun hearing about another U.S. wine region that's more comparable to New York. So thank you.
All right. Cheers. Have a good night, guys. So what do you think? Are you ready to try some Texas wine now? I'm telling you, this is good stuff. I really couldn't recommend it enough. Every wine that I've had from Lost Straw has been amazing. And hey, if you like this little sneak peek into the Cork Crew, let me know. I'm thinking of doing another episode just like this one later in the year and giving you access to a conversation the Cork Crew had a couple months ago with a very, very famous wine author. So let me know and I can get that one set up for you. If you love this episode as much as I did, I would so appreciate it if you could take a quick second to rate it and leave a review. And of course, if you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy this, please share it with them. It would mean the world to me. In next week's episode, I'll be preparing you for the holidays with 5 of my favorite wines to bring to Thanksgiving. Thanks again for listening, and as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 Wines Under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and join my mailing list. Cheers!